something is racist,
Hmm.
you don't have to say allegedly racist or it's very hard to define what something is, directly racist.
I see.
Like
Yeah.
there's no style guide for racist,
Hmm.
but like when something is
Yeah,
racist.
absolutely. Welcome to Postgrads. Two Columbia J School alumni walk into a bar. Tandy, what do you think the punchline should be?
I imagine that if you do walk into a bar as a Columbia journalism school student, you probably had to deal with that really bad medical office. So, um, hopefully, best of luck to their head trauma. Best of luck to those
Oh, you mean
injuries.
you mean they literally knocked their head on a bar.
Yeah, no,
That's
literally, yeah.
That's fantastic. That's a very unorthodox punchline. I don't even have a comeback for that. So today we have Tandy Lau, who graduated from Columbia Journalism School in 2022 and is now a public safety reporter in New York City Amsterdam News. Thank you for joining us today, Tandy.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course. So before Columbia Journalism School,
Mhm.
your master's degree, you were studying journalism in undergrad as well at California State Northridge. So since when did you have the hunch that you want to become a journalist?
I can't pinpoint it exactly when I had that hunch. It eventually happens, You go around, you try a bunch of things,
Mm-hmm.
and then you realize this is something that you're good at. And not only that, this is something fun. Happened sometime when I was an undergrad,
Right.
if I can kind of make it a little bit vague. But I think it's something that you develop, right? You realize, hey, I could write a little, hey, I like talking to people.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of it all, you realize like, hey, altogether, this is what I'm probably meant to do, or at least this is what I can do.
Absolutely. Yeah. You are a very experienced in-field journalist and you are pumping out articles almost every week.
Oh
Like
gosh.
I'm assuming that at your busiest time you're working on 3 or 4 articles at the same time.
Uh-huh.
So like what does your typical day look like to you and how do you handle such immense pressure in this industry?
Yeah, so I mean, I think for me there's not really a typical day. It's a case by case scenario,
Yeah.
right? I think our schedule is pretty liberal. What we really focus on is getting that story in, getting what stories we need to do, and also just preparing for the future, right? Like I know like one of the big things that people talk about in J school is like grabbing coffee with people, you're
Hmm.
talking, but that's really part of the job, right? Is to
Hmm.
to get to know who the people are that you're working with and really talk to people before you need them, build that relationship, and that kind of is not something that you can kind of plot out perfectly on a calendar, right? So,
Hmm.
I mean, I will say every morning I have a meeting. That's that I can't avoid.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But other than that, I could be running around New York City. I could be, Staten Island, far out
Yeah.
in Queens.
Wow. Uh-huh.
I've been, up in Newburgh a couple times for a story. Like,
Right.
there's not really that day-to-day kind of element that I think my job necessarily has compared to maybe some other newsrooms that
Hmm.
I've seen. Yeah.
I see.
Mhm.
So, do you prefer like a more scheduled kind of day-to-day environment where, like, for example, in Colombia, like you say, I have class tomorrow, and
Mhm.
the day after tomorrow, I need to work on some assignments. Like, you have this very clear day-to-day schedule, other than like this, what you just described, a more like kind of liberal timetable, more liberal environment.
I think CJS actually, to kind of push back on that, I do think CJS actually prepares you for an environment like this, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you do have to be like a bit of a self-starter, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think, when you look for stories, especially since CJS, there's just people don't necessarily want to talk to you all the time. You got to be proactive, right? Like,
Yeah.
sure, you have
Yeah.
classes, sure, you have deadlines, but I think the fact that I'm able to kind of hold myself accountable makes their job easier,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
I think you learn that from
Absolutely. Yeah.
J school
Mm-hmm.
because nobody's gonna hold your professor's too busy, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. So
Uh-huh.
you told us before that you think the best journalists know when to break the rules.
Uh-huh.
So what are some of the rules that you have broken in your career before?
Yeah. So I think for me, the place I work at an advocacy news organization,
Mm-hmm.
and that really means that you can. I don't want to say you can have an opinion
Mm-hmm.
that is, but I think you can be more vocal about what's right and wrong,
Right.
right? So
Exactly. Yeah.
if something is racist,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to say allegedly racist, or it's very hard to define what something is, directly racist.
I see.
Like
Yeah.
there's no style guide for racist,
Mm-hmm.
but like when something is
Yeah.
racist.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a moral compass between right and wrong, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
when, I don't think anybody is gonna play this kind of objectivity game when we talk about a murder or
Hmm.
we talk about, another significant major crime. I
Hmm.
think for me, that's just kind of part of what it takes to work at an advocacy news organization. And I think it's something that more newsrooms that are more traditional now are adopting too. So I think it's
Yeah,
great to see. Yeah.
absolutely. So you are a public safety reporter,
Yes.
which is a very broad beat in journalism. Would you
Yes.
give us a little introduction of what that beat might encompass, and what do you think the most important part of that topic?
Yeah,
Hmm.
I'm happy to talk about my beat. So
Hmm.
it is very broad. I mean, I think for most people, public safety means police, and that's a huge part of my beat. Like I
Hmm.
cover the NYPD. That kind of is just the tip of the iceberg. I think that's what people think about when we talk about public safety. But
Hmm.
really, I think the beat more so is how do our readers keep their families safe, right? And
Yeah.
that could mean health, right? We just had a Legionnaires breakout up in Harlem where
Hmm.
our newspaper is. What exactly was Legion? I didn't know what Legionnaire's disease was. I was like, should I be going up there? What should I be wearing a mask?
Hmm.
And I think I had those questions for myself. And I think that was really what my story was to answer what those questions were, because I'm sure someone else had those questions, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of what I report on, the ways that I report on stuff is really focusing on these kind of broader issues that go on. Like we have these big stories that go on, and what sort of things cause those issues? What's the
Hmm.
root issue? What are the contributing factors to these issues, right? So that's kind of what my job has been.
Absolutely.
Um, I'll give you an example. I
Hmm.
think when we look at, um, say like a major issue, like recently there was a big court case where somebody who who says he's been wrongfully convicted ended up facing a reinstated conviction, and
Hmm.
he basically was resentenced. And I think the media has largely focused on one, his wrongful conviction, two, the details of the court case and all that stuff. But in reality, I think the biggest kind of story was this idea of harsh sentencing. Like, why was he facing this long of a prison sentence,
Hmm.
right? Like, why was he facing 40 years when in every other country, kind of industrialized nation, he probably would have received significantly less, right?
Yeah.
But really, the final capstone to this story was more so focused on what legislation existed to
Hmm.
make it easier to address issues like over sentencing,
Hmm.
rather than just focusing on kind of the main key kind of thing that's right in front of your face where everyone is kind of writing about or
Hmm.
talking about.
Yeah. So, public safety in
uh
America is inevitably tied kind of to systematic racism as
mhm.
well, which you have done some reportages on as well.
Yeah.
So, what is your strategy when you're handling these sensitive topics? And do you see it as your responsibility to shed light on this issue, or do you see yourself more as an observer?
For at least my job, when we talk about s- kind of race's role in public safety,
Hmm.
I think we kind of have to also understand that like not everyone's, no community that you cover is a monolith. And I think really what you kind of really have to do, I think, when you want to make sure that you address systemic racism when you're covering public safety, is really look at kind of those root causes I was telling you
Right.
about, right? Like,
Hmm.
and there are like obvious ones, right? We talk about the crime bill, right? Which is, which really, 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 really caused an enormous amount of black and brown men to be locked up,
Hmm.
and we're seeing the impacts of that today.
Hmm.
But I think there are other kind of deeper, more intimate issues that you could kind of look at, and I think unless you look at those, I think it's very, you're sometimes doing yourself a disservice just by saying, here's a problem, here are the disparities in race, here's the policy that to undo it. So that's what you have to do, right? And I think we saw that, right, when after 2020 we saw
Yeah.
a big movement to call for defunding the police,
Hmm.
and then some of these communities themselves were like, hey, we this isn't what we want, right?
Hmm.
It could also, you also saw kind of people who opposed defund and opposed
Hmm.
police reform
Hmm.
really exploit these communities where they almost disagree on every other issue,
Yeah.
where they're
Yeah.
like, hey, we need more resources. We don't want to give you that. We need more, etc. We don't want to give you that. But since you agree with us on saying that you need more cops, we're going to magnify and platform this specific opinion, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And obviously it's not every, like I said, no community is a monolith. So they find these specific voices, right, who say, hey, like, we need more cops. Or I've even spoken to kind of community advocates that believe, like, you know, stop and frisk, you know, we need stop and frisk back in communities of color because it might keep us safer.
Right.
And those opinions get magnified. But
Yeah.
whatever else that they're asking for, they're ignoring, right? And
Yeah, exactly.
I think to avoid kind of the trap of that, you really have to look at the root causes of these issues.
Yeah.
And that takes time, and that takes extra homework.
Yeah.
That takes not publishing the story right after a major incident happens.
Yeah, I see.
I think it's very different from, say, somebody who opposes defund the police
Yeah.
because they live in a very wealthy neighborhood and they want
well.
they want to lock it down, right? They want to keep whoever they don't want out
of the neighborhood.
They want it to police the in-house. They want, right? Like, that's, I think, very different from somebody who, say, lost a couple children to gun violence, and now that they believe that you need cops, you need to prosecute these petty crimes, you need to do everything you can, lock them up, throw away the key to make sure that no other children are harmed. I think those are two very, very different reasons to support, like, either not defunding or even increasing the police budget. But I think the problem is because if we don't look at the root cause, we don't talk about the kind of issues that exist, what you end up is saying, like, yeah, these two problems are the same. These two people see eye to eye on this very key issue.
Superficial, these kind of Gotcha. So Amsterdam News, historically a black newspaper, and you told us in our previous conversation that you don't think being an Asian American reporter is a hindrance to your reporting, to your job, and instead it can bring out more creativity and flexibility into your reportage. Can you please, like, elaborate a little on that? How do you think your identity can become an asset as a reporter?
Yeah, so I think obviously when you work in a minority-owned newspaper, and I think specifically if it covers one specific community that you're not a part of, there's obviously going to be stories that you're going to not be able to do as well as somebody with a background that is directly tied to it, right? But I think for me here in New York City, because like I said earlier on, everything impacts everyone, right? So it's not, when you cover Black New Yorkers in New York City, it's not only going to impact Black New Yorkers in New York City because we live in the most diverse place in the world, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So when we talk about, say, the Chinatown jail that's going on, that impacts Asian Americans, that impacts Black and brown people who are, you know, who have to deal with the closure of Rikers, right?
Yeah.
Given the disparities in terms of who is locked up in Rikers right now, it impacts Little Italy, impacts Italian Americans,
right next to Chinatown. Yeah,
exactly. So I think for me, it gives me an opportunity to kind of use my identity to do stories that Amsterdam News maybe hasn't done before. So when the big one that I talked about was going to Chinatown, right?
Exactly.
And having kind of a different understanding of the kind of campaign to close Rikers and all that, but also being able to go to Chinatown and talk to people who, you know, might only speak Mandarin and Cantonese and trust me to really get the story right? I think really being able to really have these conversations about what impacts within my own community and what sort of things that my own community is doing and movements in my own community and how they impact our readership, I think is really important. I think, like I said, New York is so densely connected with every different community, right? That I think it's just impossible to fully divorce. So it's given me an opportunity to be more creative.
Absolutely. And you mentioned your reportage on the Chinatown jail program, which was also coincidentally one of our first assignments when we got into J school. And you know, as someone who was just starting at J school, imagine tackling that behemoth of a problem. It was very challenging. So, as someone who is obviously more educated and more informed than I am on that topic, can you please give us a synopsis on what's going on? Like, why is it important, and how did it end up like this?
First of all, don't put yourself down.
No.
I sure you. I mean, I think there's been plenty of great like reporting on the issue.
Hmm.
So don't put yourself down
Yeah,
on
of
it.
course.
Basically, there's a plan to close Rikers Island. There's a lot of problems with that place.
Hmm.
Violence. The jails are older.
Hmm.
It's also environmentally just not it, right?
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
So we have a plan to build 4 borough-based jails to house kind of the people who are incarcerated on Rikers Island right
Hmm.
now. Close down the facility. We move everyone there to the borough-based jails. And there's a lot of reasons why the borough-based jails are appealing to criminal justice reformers. The main thing is that they're right by the courthouse. So say if I'm held on Rikers Island, hopefully never, but if I'm held on Rikers Island, I have a court date. I gotta wake up at 4 a.m. They're
Jesus.
gonna take me on the bus. So instead, if you're arrested in Manhattan, you go and you appear in court in Manhattan. You're held in Chinatown.
Hmm.
It's just down the street, right? They take you in the little tunnel. Now, obviously, there have been concerns ranging from like public safety,
Yeah.
although there has been research showing that jails in your community actually don't make it more dangerous. Many of these communities already actually have had a jail in the past
Hmm.
before.
Hmm.
But even beyond that, there's been kind of other concerns in terms of like environmental,
Yeah.
um, you know, tearing down a building and building a really, really tall building up. What is that going to do to a community like Chinatown,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
But at the
Hmm.
same time, you have Columbus Park, which is nearby the the jail where Chinese seniors live, and it's
Yeah,
where
yeah.
right,
Well.
like they do tai chi and play checkers, right? And it would cast a shadow is what they're
Uh-huh.
worrying about. They're worrying about just generally it changing the landscape of Chinatown. And this is a community that has been hit with issue after issue,
Yeah.
9/11,
Yeah.
COVID-19,
Hmm.
Hurricane Sandy, right?
Hmm.
And they haven't had the same amount of investment as other lower Manhattan communities
Exactly.
have. And the belief is because they're a working class community of color,
Hmm.
right? So there are different reasons why people don't want this jail, and it's a very complicated issue, and I don't think it's an issue that I think anyone has fully grasped on all sides.
Yeah, fair.
And my story was just trying to grasp it from some sides,
Yeah.
and that was tough,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Hmm.
um so that's kind of a quick synopsis. I could
That's
go
fair.
on forever
Yeah, no,
with
no,
it,
that's fair. That's fair.
but
So, one of your articles in 2023 really stood out to me,
2023.
where you talked about how social media is dividing Asian and Black communities. Yeah.
Yes, that one.
Do you think this phenomenon still exists 2 years later, and in a city as diverse as New York City? How would you describe the Black and Asian relationship here?
Ah, that story is such a long time
Yeah,
ago.
I know, right?
But
Hmm.
thank you for bringing that up.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think right now social media is as divisive as we've seen. So I do think if you step outside your house, I think there's still kind of there's still racism that goes on between community. Every community within has its own racial biases,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But I think in New York, at least, there is there is an acceptance of people, just because of where you are, just because you can't avoid interacting with every group of person, right? No matter where you live. I think what a lot of that social media really did was make people like over prepared to have a hostile interaction with somebody.
I see.
I think it made people more
Yeah,
antisocial.
exactly.
And I think there's a difference between being street smart and protecting yourself, and
Hmm.
really not and antisocial behavior. I think, right? And I think as journalists, it's very difficult
Uh-huh.
to kind of find sources, find it when you're always worried about the worst. So,
Exactly.
um, I think that was one thing I wanted to kind of show with the story was that a lot of these narratives were kind of things that weren't necessarily things that were endemically going on.
Yeah.
They could paint a picture that, and at the same time, when we talk about individual unique issues, I think it is still important to make sure that you have that conversation of what can stop it, what the root causes of it, right? And I think to highlight a little bit about that, when we look at the root cause, I mean, I grew up in LA, and
Hmm.
my grandma lived in LA Chinatown for basically the entire like last 15, 20 years of her
Hmm.
life.
Hmm.
And there were issues LA Chinatown is right next to downtown LA, and there
Mm.
were issues of young people attacking old Chinese people
Yeah. Hmm.
like all the time. Like,
Hmm.
and it was never politicized in the same way.
Yeah.
And some of these issues that we heard were issues that we weren't necessarily able to pinpoint as a hate crime, right? But I think the narrative ran with it, and I think there should have been further conversations of how we could protect our elders and what sort of things do Asian American seniors need
Hmm.
more than just this
Focus on the color of the attackers.
focus on
Hmm.
the race of the
Yeah.
attackers.
Hmm.
So I think when we look at the root cause of a lot of these issues, I definitely think anti-Asian racism was a contributor,
Hmm.
but I think there were many issues that already existed, and I think for younger Asian Americans who grew up in a time where we did see these things happen and nobody cared,
Hmm.
I think it it was kind of disheartening to see like this lack of a broader conversation on
Yeah.
how we can
Yeah.
make Asian
Hmm.
Americans safer, how we can let them be more self-sufficient when they
Right.
could just go
Hmm.
and grab some Chinese fast
Hmm.
food.
Yeah. Yeah.
They could go to the park, they could
Hmm.
do what they want to do without feeling unsafe and without, encountering, and even if they weren't a victim of a crime, for them to just be able to feel safe and to
Yeah.
be able
Yeah.
to feel like I think that was really important because when you see this stuff, it's scary, man.
Hmm.
It's not, you get scared for your parents and grandparents,
Hmm.
even if you don't buy into these narratives, or
Hmm.
even if
Hmm.
it's still you're still concerned and you're still, hey, like check in with
Hmm.
me, right? And I think that's really where understanding where those root
Hmm.
causes come from
Yeah.
is yeah.
One of the biggest issue when like you spent a section talking about this in your 2023 articles
Mm-hmm.
about the translation of Black Lives Matter
Mm-hmm.
in Chinese social medias, which are
Yeah.
very intentionally mistranslated
Uh-huh.
into Black lives are superior or Blacks are expensive or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. So from my personal experience, at least, I grew up in China.
Mm-hmm.
Most Asian people that I know who are prejudiced toward the Black communities don't necessarily bear these sentiments out of malice, but rather out of like ignorance, because they see what they see on social medias, which are of course cherry picked to be the worst of the worst,
Mm-hmm.
and then that they form their opinions from that.
Yeah.
So in this kind of environment where people can simply profit and therefore be encouraged to demonize the entire race and spread
Mm-hmm.
disinformation, what can you and I, as I suppose regular people, do in this situation?
That's a good question,
Hmm.
and I definitely when I did that story, that was one thing that I actually learned. I didn't, I don't have WeChat.
Hmm. Yeah.
My mom uses WeChat, and
Yeah.
she's always on it.
Yeah.
I think first of all, obviously, I think it's you have to understand that you can't change this issue as a regular person.
Yeah,
This has
no,
been
fair.
going on. This is bigger than both of us,
Exactly. Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Um, I think it first obviously starts with like us ourselves, right? To make sure that we don't subscribe to stuff like
Hmm.
this,
Hmm.
right? And then just I think part of it is really having, like you said, if it's born out of ignorance, then a lot of it happens through interacting with other people because it's very hard to be ignorant about something when you interact with it all the
Hmm.
time. That's really all you can really do.
Yeah.
I think there's not necessarily a fix that I think me or you could do. I think as long as we're personally responsible,
Hmm.
we do our best to kind of
Exactly.
provide some sort of counterbalance to
Yeah.
people around us. I think that's the most you can do. As reporters, obviously, be responsible with what you report, but I think that's it.
And hopefully,
Yeah.
we can like sort of like do that counterbalance that when this episode come out,
I hope so. I hope so.
yeah. And
You know,
we're coming to the end of the show
yes.
where we usually give our guests like a few minutes to just monologue away, and I want to give you this prompt that now you are like very experienced infield journalist, and what if there's somebody who is still a little bit on the fence about entering this industry, but a little bit curious towards this, and what would your advice to them be?
So I don't want to say don't do it because you never want to like trash on somebody's dreams, right? Like
Yeah.
I definitely don't want to do that. I think,
Uh-huh.
but I do think have a realistic expectation of what you want to do. I think I think there's a lot of folks that go through this industry and they just tell you, don't do it.
Mhm.
Money's not good. The hours are long. And that's like a broad generalization. Obviously, that's a lot of people go through that.
Mhm.
Um, and I could tell you that some of these things that, some of these warnings I heard are true, right? I think most of them are probably somewhat true, and for people who go through this industry. For me, I really think that journalism journalism is a dope job. I think because you could really do you could really do things and learn about things that I think you could get paid to learn about things that you don't necessarily have to have an expertise in. You just gotta go show up one day and somebody will tell you their life story. You gotta go put like, you gotta go right alongside a police car one day, and then the next day you gotta go catch a movie screening about, right? It's a cool job full of diverse things to
Mhm.
do, right? Like I said earlier, like I think there the rigidity of journalism I think gets oversold. There is so much flexibility in this job to really be someone else for a day,
Mhm.
right? And I think to take somebody's story and really expand on and learn about it, I think is really cool.
Uh,
Then be honest with yourself, and if
mhm.
that's just you want to just spend 9 months living in New York City with an Ivy League degree, and then you plan on doing something else, that's fine. I mean, like that's your money, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like you know, but just weigh all of those things. Think about everything, both in the real world and what your future could look like. And if it's something that you really think that it's something that's for you, but you think it's really expensive, I'm not going to tell you no, don't do it, right? Um, but just be realistic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just spend time with your family.
There we go.
Be
There
safe.
we
I think
go.
it's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we got that. All right. And that's Tandy Law. Stay tuned.